Okay. Good morning, everyone. The first line is empty. If someone wants to sit here, uh, I switch. A welcome to us, to all of us that is now here in presence or online. Follow us in the YouTube. I'd like to introduce you our guest, the speaker of this evening, this afternoon. It's my colleague, Professor Olivia Levrini. Olivia Levrini has his background in physics, and she's working for many decades in the area of physics and science education. He is located in the Department of Physics and Astronomy Augusto Righi uh, at the University of Bologna. Uh, she was a very renewed researcher in science education. She has organized the ESERA in 2019. It was a very big, very interesting conference at ESERA just before the pandemics. And last year, she just finished the coordination of a very big European project, Fedora project, that I hope she mentions something about this. Okay, for this afternoon, Olivia will speak us with one of the subjects of your research uh, entitled Futurizing Science Education for the Society of Acceleration and Uncertainty. Okay, Olivia, thank you very much to be here. This microphone.
Does it work? Yes. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Mauricio, Hernani, and all the people who invited me here. As you know, it's a great pleasure because Brazil is really a special place for me. It's the second time I'm here, and always I feel home, and it's a very also very special. A very special context to talk about science education and physics education with this broad scope and also political, sociological, and philosophical implications. This is very rare, I think, in the world, and I always find this place a sort of magic here. So let's move to the talk. This is the title that Mauricio already told. As he told, I very briefly position myself just to introduce where I come from and where is my position. I come from Bologna. Bologna is supposed to be the oldest university in the Western world. It was established in 1088. And I live in the I work in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. This is the picture of my department. And in the department, there are many different research areas. So there is applied physics and complex systems, astrophysics, atmospheric physics, nuclear and subnuclear physics, physics education and history of physics, physics of condensed matter, atom and molecules, physics of the earth, theoretical physics. So we are one of the research area of this big department. And as Mauricio told, I mean, I'm in this. I'm trying to lead. I have the honor to serve as to coordinate this little group. It is little, but we are only 3 faculty members. But I have 4 PhD students, a postdoc, and mainly this is the reason of this slide. We work very closely with the secondary school teachers. So secondary school teachers are part of our research group, and we tried to apply, and we were successful to apply for European projects. This was very important for us, and we had we could coordinate several projects, and the themes of this project are future literacy, embracing complexity, system thinking. These are the themes of also the IC project. It was the first project that I coordinated. Another a project that I coordinated is called Identities. It's also finished, and the theme were interdisciplinarity in STEM, pre-service teacher education. SEALS was a project where we were partners, and the themes were open schooling, sustainability, models of change, and all these themes converged into the Fedora project, the last one that is just finished, and it will be the topic of this talk. Just to tell you something that is important also to position our work is that we feel the pressure also of the European research programs and the themes that Europe in this moment consider particularly important to orient the research in Europe. This is a very recent competence framework for sustainability. And I just put this slide here because you can see that the main themes here that Europe is pushing are complexity, values, futures, and agency. So these are very hot themes in Europe. So today I will focus on these topics of future, but for me, and I will focus in particular with on a Fedora project that just finished. Fedora is a sort of acronym for future-oriented science education to enhance responsibility and engagement in the society of acceleration and uncertainty. It involved the different universities like University of Bologna, but also the Kaunas University of Technologies in Lithuania, the University of Helsinki, the University of Oxford, and also an association that is called Teach the Future. I will talk about this because they are people who professionally work as futurists. People who are have the professional abilities to build scenarios and also to think about how their competencies can be also taught in schools and among teachers, and also an agency for communication. I just made this long presentation because I think it is important also to characterize our approach to physics education, because we feel a lot the push from schools, okay, the issues that teachers really feel in the real classes. We feel this push, but we also feel very strongly the pull from Europe and the themes that Europe consider priorities for them. And it is always a challenge to try to align what is happening in the school, what the Europe try to orient us. And also it is rather a challenge to try to align these two so far words staying within the physics department where we have to teach physics. So the challenge is how to regenerate and to think physics in order to address teachers' needs and in order to align schools' needs with European priorities. So this is a very big challenge, and this is something that characterizes a lot our approach and our method. So let's enter the main topic of today. Starting from a push from the schools. So future is a theme that we started to address almost 10 years ago, just because teachers in our group from the classes complained and they felt that something was happening in their classes. And they started to feel in particular that for the students, there was a big change in their perception of time and in their perception of the future. The teachers really started to talk with us about the problem that for the young students it was always very difficult to push the imagination forward. It was impossible to see the future. They didn't have an horizon. And if you don't have an horizon, a future horizon, also the present become fragmented and this is how our teachers started to talk with us. They felt their students that to become very anxious when they had to make any kind of decisions, okay? And so and in particular the reaction to the events and to the fact was just oriented, they were totally oriented toward sizing the moment, sniffing out every opportunity and keeping open all possible scenarios. So the present became frenetic and a collection of events. This is how the teachers thought about their students. So we started to think and to read and to shop around just to see if it was just a local situation or if it was something that was much more general, if it was a social issue. And this is when we met Harmut Rosa and the book of this on the Society of Acceleration, and we started to think about what actually Topper mentioned by future shock. They were describing that indeed our era is characterized by exactly what future shock. What does it mean, future shock? It means that the rate of change is so fast that we don't have the time and to think about what is happening. And this happens in particular to the schools, because the society is getting faster and faster, and the society is changing very quickly. But our schools and our university, our social systems have inner inertia, inner velocity that are not able to keep the pace of change. And so we started to observe this kind of misalignment between the velocity of society and the velocity of what happens in the schools. We started from here, and also we started to think about to try to describe the students' perception of present and student perception of students' way to deal with their daily life. And in reading Harmut Rosa, also we found that Walter Benjamin, also at the beginning of 20th century, so he reflected about the different German words to talk about episodes of present. In German there are two different words to describe episodes of the present. The first one is Erlebnissen. Erlebnissen means that they describe episodes of mere experience. They are events that seems to pass very slowly, okay, but they don't have any impact on the construction of an identity. You forget them very, very quickly. These are Erlebnissen. Instead, there are also Erfahrungen. Instead, they are events that seems to pass very quickly, but that they are event and moment in your life that have a strong impact on the construction of your identity or your sense of the self. And already, and Benjamin at the beginning also of the 19th century complained that also 1 century ago the era, and they were approaching an era of rich of Erlebnissen and poor of Erfahrungen. Today, instead, we are in a so quick and so quick and fast society that actually Rosa said we are experiencing a world of short episodes. We are full of events, and it is very difficult for all of us, but in particular for the students, just to think about what are the events that are important for them, how to make a decision, how to create a structure in the sense of the present. So, if you don't have a vision of the future and your present become very fragmented, we are in front actually in a very generational change in our perception of the time with respect to the classical modernity. Because this means that we are running just to keep the pace, but we are losing a sense of direction. We are losing a sense of progress. We are losing a sense of real change. And this is how they call the frenetic standstill. And this is really something that is challenging our collective perception of the time with respect to the sense classical modernity. So our teachers were describing a situation that was very serious, very deep. They were not just complaining. They were describing something very important, and something that was also even more serious, because this perception of time was creating, also had some implication of an identity level and also at the level of the social relationship. Always Amos Rosa describe this link and this implication between the sense of time, the sense of identity, and social relationship in this sense. He is describing as an impact of this acceleration as alienation from time. He describes, he uses this word to tell this sense, this feeling that almost all of us feel, that we are running, and just we are trying to pursue objectives and to follow practices that actually not always we want to do, but we feel that we have to do just because we are following something. Okay, so we are alienated from time, but also this is producing alienation from the self and alienation from the others, because actually our sense of ourself and our relationship is really also derives from actions and from experiences that are situated in a social and a material world, and also in a sort of space-time fabric. So also our sense of self has an inner space-time structure, also our relationship with the others. So this is just our initial analysis, okay, of just to interpret what the teachers were talking about. And so we started to ask, okay, but what does this reflection has to do with science teaching in our classes? What can we do in our? We are physics education researchers. We are what is the relationship with this situation in the society and our job? And what manifestations of the society of acceleration can be noticed in science physics school classes? I mean, in much more details with respect to what the teachers were talking about. And is it possible, does it make sense to rethink science? There is room in science teaching and in physics teaching to do something about this situation, and to try to use physics teaching and science teaching as a source of knowledge and skills to help the young generation and help all of us to navigate this fast changing society. So they were very ambitious and very complex questions, but we try to find a way to address them. So in the this is the, I mean, I thought to organize the talk according to this outline. First of all, I would like to present you some results from studies that we carried out or that have been carried out on students' perception and conception of future and time, and that were both before and after the pandemic. We started to think about future and time before the pandemics, but pandemics was really a moment, special moment also for our time structure. Okay, so it was a very particular moment. So I will present you some results of these studies, and then I will give you some design principles, the principles that we try to pointed out in order to rethink about science teaching and physics teaching in order to deal with these issues, and then some results from our implementations. Before starting, just is it something that you have a feeling of I'm talking about something that is too dramatic? Just to... Okay. Okay. So let's move to the first part in this about students' perception or conception of future and time. So in Fedora, we had a work package that was led by the University of Helsinki by Antti Laerto, who was mentioned this morning, and he led this work package about just to carry out these studies in order to investigate students' perception of time and student perception of future. And the papers that was mentioned this morning was also part of this investigations. And during in Fedora, we studied, we made different part studies in order to try to investigate students' perception of the future, and also a desk research on future in order to see if the textbook and the curricula all over Europe that somehow touched towards this, referred to this future or time issues. And the results of these investigations that were through questionnaire, there were through interviews, and they were sum up in they were condensed and they were expressed in terms of issues, okay, that the students perceive in terms of with respect to time and future, and one of them was strongly related to the relationship between time and technologies, because the perception of the future for students is strongly related also to their perception of technologies, because technology is conceived as a sort of tool for making the future. But there are other issues related just to the perception of time more in general, and also some issues related to the educational policies. And on the basis of these issues, also the group prepared some recommendation in order to impact the teaching, but also policy actions and stuff like that. Today, if you want, you can find this deliverable. There is a detailed description of all these issues. Today I would like just to mention some of these results that are very important also for the implication on teaching in the classes. This is the focus of my talk. And in particular, I would like to introduce you to two results that are particularly worrying for me. One is what we call the polarization and linearization attitude, also according to time and about future. And the second one is the tendency to search for simple solutions to build safe bubbles, also time bubbles in this sense. I will describe this to the first one, but I just want to mention that indeed it is very well known in the literature what is called the two-track thinking. Two ways of thinking, and there is this polarization. If you think about future in terms of personal future, or if you think about future in terms of a collective, a social future, there is a completely different attitude. Because if the students think about their personal future, I'm just thinking very generally, but this is a tendency. They tend to activate a sense of control, a bias, the illusion of control, and the illusion that they have the chance to control their career and to control their personal way to get. Instead, if they think about collective future, there is a very dystopic view, and the idea that really the future is much worse than the present, and that there is nothing a lot to do. Okay, they feel the sense of agency. They don't have the sense of agency in the collective and in the social future. So this is called two-track thinking about the future, and it is one of the other manifestation of this polarization between individual and collective. Also, this is the topic that we talked to today, and it is something that emerged very quick, very often in the way of dealing with these big issues among the young generation, but not only among them. So I would like to describe a little bit more in detail these two different results by referring to some study that we carried out during the pandemic. During the pandemic, where the pandemic, of course, was a very complicated moment. It was a very complex phenomenon that touched all the society. But for us, we were thinking about time. So we decided to analyze the pandemics also through the lens of time. This is a study that we carried out, and we just wanted to see the change in the space-time fabric that was occurring during the pandemic. This is very typical also from the sociology of time, the idea that when there is a dramatic event, one of the main changes occur also at the level of the daily rituals and in the level of the perception of time. So we decided to follow Hartmut Rosa, the sociology of time, and we use time as a sociological construct, as a way to read interaction, social interaction, cultures, institutional and power dynamics, because they can be analyzed. This was a discovery for us. They can be analyzed for their temporal structure, like rituals, images of the future, and relation with the past. So during the pandemic, we decided to take this perspective. Indeed, if you think about the pandemic through the lens of time, you could observe so many different velocity and perception of time. the social and the global time was was accelerated because of this natural phenomena, because of the virus, and we were witnesses. We observed the dynamic of all the social institutions, like the policy system, educational system, economics. They try to run as quickly as possible to slow down the speed of the pandemic. And we remember flattening the curve, just running to flattening the curve. We were observing this society accelerated and accelerated because they had to try to address this so impressive problem. And on the other hand, during the lockdown, we were in our personal bubble where we had to reorganize our daily life ritual in a sort of present shock, where we had to reorganize ourselves just in this bubble of present, just to dealing with our very simple daily routines. So if you look at pandemic through the times, you observe this strong misalignment, and for us it was very interesting because indeed the pandemic and also this personal way to live the pandemic was a way to disclosure some time structure that and pieces also that during normal time were invisible or they were not important. They were just part of this. So in this moment, we decided to involve some students, secondary students, to try to understand and to interview them about how they were living their daily life routine. In particular, they were very good students in physics and in mathematics. They were secondary school students. This is not a statistical group. We wanted very good students because we wanted to understand if they were using, how they used also their learning and their scientific knowledge to deal with their daily life routine. This was just a very generic question that we had, but it was very interesting to interview them and to try to understand what was happening and if physics learning was playing some role, okay, in this moment to managing time and to managing this dramatic situation. That was our question. And indeed what we found was that indeed we were in a very strange situation because instead of being in a future shock, they were experiencing a present shock. Just they had to dealing with this very special moment. And in some sense, also through the interviews, we observed that instead of experiencing a sense of alienation of time, there was the problem of reappropriating of time, just to rearrange their daily life routine indeed, to search for a sense of agency and a sense of directionality. So they were trying to reorganize their daily life routine in order to however continue their life and however to think about how to prepare for their personal careers and not to lose too much, to lose opportunity or stuff like that. So in some sense they activated very specific knowledge and skills in order to rearrange their daily life. But what was very interesting for us and somehow shocking was that again we noticed a very strong polarization between the personal and the social dimension. All daily life routine, even if, I mean, it was a very special moment because you could observe science in its making, you could observe society in its making. It was a sort of open air lab. You could observe the methodology. Instead, they were very good students in science and math and in physics, but instead their attention was just to take care of themselves and just to think about their personal future, not to lose the opportunity as for their future success as professional. So they and also we were also very impressed because for these students, they are not statistical. This is not a statistical, but it's just it's something that happened. But also for another thing that we observed is that mathematics as physics and physics for them was very important because it was perceived as a sort of safe bubble because of the sense of certainty, because of the sense that it was something that didn't change. Also in this changing world, there was a bubble of where nothing was changing, and that was the exercise on integrals and very big exercise of math, because that was a sense of something that didn't change. So also in this case, we could notice this trend that was already very well known. So the two-track thinking, this polarization, and also this tendency of searching for safe bubbles. And mathematics and physics for these students became the way to search for these safe bubbles. Okay, so we went on, and we also decided to try to carry out follow-up studies in the post-pandemic period, and to see if it was possible to investigate the students' perception of time, how they also when they came back to school, and this became a sort of obsession for us to see their perception of time. And in the post-pandemic period, also I observed this other phenomenon in particular for among the physics students in our bachelor degree. So the students of the first years of physics, they were the students who experienced the pandemic in the last years of their secondary schools. And I started to collect very impressive storytelling about how they were living the learning of physics, okay? Because other two fears became rather evident. For these students who experienced the pandemic, actually, they started to complain the relationship with physics, and in particular with a very hyper specialization attitude in physics in our courses, because they in some moments started to fear that they conceived learning physics as a sort of tunnel, as a sort of silos. They perceived the silos effect, that hyper-specialization of physics after pandemic becomes a way to cut too much, okay? The relationship with their learning with the rest of the life. So in some sense, they felt to be guided into a tunnel in some sense, and on the other sense, they were feeling and they were expressing a sense of getting lost in the world, because the learning in the disciplines became actually so sophisticated but so technical that they didn't find in the learning in the disciplines the tools to navigate the sciences. So the silos effect and the fog effect became something very difficult in this moment. So we are trying to understand what is happening now, and we are investigating this. We are asking the students also to tell about their daily routine and how they experience physics learning, and we are developing a new lens for analyzing the time structure that students use in order to describe their perception of time. And we use as a lens the distinction between external time and internal time by Ilya Prigozhin. He was a Nobel Prize, and he worked in complex systems far from the equilibrium. Also, he was mentioned yesterday, and he makes this distinction between external time or chronological time. The time is the time of physics, the time of the clocks, the Newtonian time, the time that characterized modernity, the classical modernity. It describes the events and the process in the physical world by organizing the events through a conventional structure. And it is the time of the clock. It is the time that is quantified by measuring it using clocks and calendars. It is a linear way to mark the time. It is linear, regular, ordered, and it is conceived as a continuous progression. And in this case, the event don't change time. Time is something that is there. It's external to the event. On the other hand, instead, there is what Prigogine called the internal time, that is the time of the experience. It is the time that has also some chirological moment. It describes some temporal behavior of complex systems that are not in equilibrium. There is some internal dynamics that determine the time evolution of these systems, and these systems also activate patterns and behaviors that are not simply predictable in terms of the initial condition. This is not something that is predictable in terms of external condition, but it's something that is also refers to inner dynamics of the systems, and it captures the notion that these systems exhibit their own inner temporal order that emerge as a result of this internal dynamics, and in this open system, in the interaction between the systems and the environment, in this open, and also this is very important because in this internal dynamics of complex systems, also there is a special role for contingency for a specific moment, and this can create some discontinuity, and this can produce new form of order, the emergence of new form of equilibrium, new form of order. And so there are some moments that are the chirological moment, the Leibniz moment, that the Erfahrungen moment, that determine also qualitative change in the stuff. So we use this general structure in terms of markers in order to analyze some written essays from the students, just to see how they describe the time and how they feel the time. And indeed, now I'm talking about just very preliminary results. I'm not very detailed here in describing the methodology, but because we are doing it is a work that is going on in this moment. There is a master's student who is doing her thesis on that. But we are using this general distinction as markers to analyze written essays from secondary school students, but also interviews from university students, the students that I mentioned before that have that kind of feeling with respect to the disciplines. And we are finding at the end of the talk there are some happy ends, okay? So but in this moment also we are discovering that indeed when there is a sense of discomfort, a sense of problem to be addressed, also in learning physics, in learning at university and secondary school, the problem is somehow conceptualized as a problem of making a better plan at the level of external time. So there is a problem of there is the tendency to address anxiety and the problem of aligning with the personal learning, just trying to optimize time planning, just to organize, try to split what they call lifetime, work time, to improve planning, and just to act at the level of external time. Okay. And when there is another kind of illusion, the kind of illusion that in order to pursue well-being as a student, also the illusion that one can create a myth about personal times in terms of just dreaming to live in a very far place where there is no job, no work, no pressure from society, just the time of life that is not very completely different from work. So the idea, the delusion that a sense of issues with times can be addressed acting at the level of external time, or just trying to have personal time far from society or far from. And in what is also worrying for me is that in some sense these attitudes, instead of addressing the problem of alienation for time, they can contribute also to increase this sense of alienation of time. And because in any case there is not this perception, and there is not an attention to take care of the internal time, the internal time, in particular. And this circle, vicious circles, is because there is in this moment there is an increasing phenomenon of burning out, quiet quitting, an increasing sense of the identity is strongly fragmented, and also we are noticing that also the relation with the others, instead of being a source of new energy, it becomes another sense of it is another source for the pleasure. So, and in particular, this is the point where we are acting at the level. Now I'm moving to the rest. The problem is that in some sense, there are difficulties to take care of internal time and its alignment with external commercial, in particular to cultivate what Virginia Woolf called the moment of being, or what they were their epiphany of joy. So the moment of Erfahrung, Benjamin mentioned. Also, Cristiano talked about also hiatus, these discontinuities in external time that are the moment of regeneration, the time of where the sense of the self and the sense of the trajectory of identity can come out. So these are very important moments that unfortunately, this is unfortunately our school systems and our teaching don't take care, because our systems, our schools are still very organized in this sense of a very rigid, chronological, modern structure of time, where the students are guided to follow all the same piece of learning, just to split learning in terms of external moment and the calendar and the hour. Instead, we are living in a liquid, accelerated, uncertainty, risk-based society where the dynamics of time is something very complicated. And in our schools, at least in our schools, there are not moments to cultivate the moment of being, the moment of epiphanies and the moment of erlebnis. So, this is our analysis, and where we the analysis of society, and the question is, what can we do in our school? Okay, is it possible to rethink about science teaching in order to change also the space and time fabric and the structure of space and time in order to foster special way of learning that is this is how we call the futurized science education, and there are two basic ideas. The first one is indeed is that time is can be a social structure, and in this sense it can be changed, and it can be, and it's something that can be adapted also to different needs. But in particular, if we move to future, I mean, future thinking can be a way to rethink about our structure of time and to regenerate and to challenge our modern perception of time, that is this linear, oriented to a bright future, and in sense of a progression, a linear progression toward a better and better future. Okay, and we indeed found in future studies and in this study a possible way to change and to rethink about our structure, time structure. And the other idea is that indeed physics and science is really a rich source of concepts, knowledge, words, model, structure to talk about time in different ways, not only in a Newtonian time, in a Newtonian model time, but there is a lot of richness, a lot of room in the bottom of science, and in some sense, so there is space to do something. So, in order to challenge the modern perception of time for our risk society, for our society of acceleration, we found indeed very, very inspirational and very useful the field that is called futures studies. We didn't know about its existence until some years ago. Instead, future studies is an interdisciplinary field that involves sociologists, philosophers, historians, political scientists, psychologists, economists, and they are investigating actually trends and other sources, patterns, and causes in order to develop foresight, and to create possible, probable, desirable future scenarios. Okay. And what we learned in studying future studies and this field is that indeed when we talk about future thinking and we think about teach the future, we are not referring to a crystal ball. We are not able to see the future, okay? Of course, but the future is a way of thinking, is a mindset, is a way of dealing with the problems, and it's a way to address and to organize yourself in order to deal with the problem. In particular, it is a practice also not for also to try to also to ask to ourselves not only what happens but also what can happen, what could happen, to try to educate ourselves in a sense of possibilities of something that can happen. It is also a way, a practice to introduce in our thinking the question what if, and not only the question what is or what was, what is happening, what was happening, but what happened if something changes. It is also a way to think and to imagine the future in terms of possibilities, not only one future, but in terms of possibilities. These possibilities can be possible futures, but there are also plausible. Some of them can be much more desirable, but to think in terms of possibilities. And also to introduce in terms of possibility also the contingency thinking, the possibility that something can happen to create this equilibrium that can be the way to regenerate, also to create new meaning, to create new sense on what is happening. And also to think about the future, it means also to create a sense of horizon of possibilities that can orient you also to act in the present just because you have an orientation toward the future. This is their motto, describing alternative futures and empowering students to influence them, to think that the future is something that you can imagine in order to also try to act in a way to maximize the possibility, the probability to create your future. This is the cone. I don't know if it was. This is one of the main tool that the futurists use in order to describe their sense of futures and to give the sense that for them futures is a plural. It's plural. It's not one future, but it's a sense of future. So the present is on the left, and the futures are possible scenarios. Also, the concept of scenarios is something that is completely different from the sense of the past. That was only one. Instead of thinking about the scenarios, I'm thinking in these scenarios also to think about the distinction between what are the probable, what are the possible, the plausible, and the desirable future. Also because in the future studies, they taught us, for example, different techniques, and they use different techniques to build probable scenarios, to build plausible scenarios, or to build desirable scenarios. Because as futurists, for example, if they have to build some probable scenario, what they do, they just analyze the present, analyze the past, and use the typical trends from the past, the present to the future, just to extrapolate something from the present to the future, just searching for the main trends that they can become important in the future. This is the probable future. But then if you introduce the sense of contingency, if you introduce the possibility of that something can happen, you move from probable to the possible scenarios in terms of you consider other possibilities that probably they are not so probable, but it doesn't matter, they can happen. Okay, just consider the contingency, not the main trend, but the little thing that can happen and that can change the general evolution of a society. Instead, if you try to design desirable futures, they change completely the logic and the techniques to build this desirable future, because they don't start from the present, they don't start from past, present to the future, but they do what they call foresight. Start, push your imagination in the future, think about the kind of futures that you want, the kind of problem that you want to see solved, and then do what they call backcasting. Think about what can happen in order to have that kind of. So this is a structure that can be used with the students to play with possible futures, also in order to activate different reasoning just in terms of noticing the trends, considering contingencies, dealing with your desires, your possible futures, in order to backcasting and think about how you can contribute to having and to getting that scenarios. What is interesting here is that indeed this is not considered as a tool just for mere speculation, but for acting, just for acting and to have a conscious action agency also in the future. So also action competence is something that is conceived part of this back and forth dynamics from the future to the present and vice versa. What was interesting for us is this is a field, in an interdisciplinary field, that is used in order to support policymakers, to support the business, in order to make this possible plans or to consider the future. But actually it is based on scientific concept. This is based on our it is based on how science create models, simulation, create models for the futures. So the question is, why we don't rethink about teaching, physics teaching and science teaching, in order to use scientific knowledge just as a background, as a conceptual and epistemological resource to develop this kind of also this kind of competencies in the students. And we discovered that indeed there is a lot of space in our classes, because even if time is one of the main concepts in physics, for example, we don't teach a lot of time. And at the end of physics classes, and the end of physics at the secondary school level in particular, the perception time is just used as a way to measure, just the clock time. It's just a way to measure. It's the time of the clock. It's not a structure of thinking. So there is a lot of space, because actually in school. Okay, because of course as I already anticipated, I mean our physics classes and our schools is strongly based on this modern and Newtonian concept of time, and we insist a lot about also the not only on the at the conceptual level, but also at epistemological level. We insist a lot to show the students and to convince students that if we know the initial condition, then we have the law that allowed us to determine the future evolution of a system in a very certain way. Okay, and this is the image that students usually have of time in physics at secondary school level. Instead, actually in physics, we has a lot of other time structure have been developed. The quantum physics, where they introduced also a sense of probabilistic. The probability became ontological, and the principle of superposition becomes the evolution of possibilities, not just evolution of a state, but a superposition of possible states. Okay, and also in the science of complex system, of course, it is so rich. We know also of vocabulary and also epistemological structure, because in physics we can find epistemic and logical uncertainty, superposition principles, sensitive dependence from the initial conditions, scenarios building, randomness, contingency, projection, standard determinist prediction, feedback and circular causality, and computational simulation. They are, if we use the lens of time, they are just tools to deal with time. Okay, it's just a way to pay attention to some concepts that are part of our teaching. So, and so these are the two main ideas that we use in order to create this model, this approach that we call to futurize, okay, science education. The first principle, and these are, I call them principles because we use them as a sort of orientation to design materials, to design teaching modules to be used in the classes, okay? So the first principle is instead to stress and to point out how science deals with time in mechanics, thermodynamics, quantum physics, whatever. I mean, just and to teach and to guide the students to learn the physics concept related to future and related to time. So this means operationally just to align in teaching physics the scientific temporal pattern and causal model and progressively complexify the concept of time by introducing and enriching the vocabulary and the mathematical structure to conceptualize time in physics. This is the first idea. The second principle is actually to add a sort of epistemological layer and to think that indeed on the concept of space and the concept of time were object also of philosophical debate, epistemological debate, and just to introduce a critical level to talk about time, and also, so for example, to think and to use also time and space and time as a way to think about what is science, what is the sense of the model, what is the values that are embedded in the models of science, like certainty, determinism, uncertainty, or stuff like that. So add a critical layer to talk and to discuss about the time that is used in physics. The third layer is related to another principle that is indeed just to incorporate in some moments specific activities that are inspired by future thinking, by future studies, just to introduce also some specific activities to play with the cone that I presented, and just to play and to imagine about what does it mean to foresight, to backcasting, and to introduce this layer of thinking in order to. So I don't know if you noticed, but we moved from science and time as a scientific content, okay, to time as an epistemological theme, just to act as some critical thinking, to a layer that moves from to epistemology to thinking, and just to try to use these tools to turn epistemology into thinking, into a way of thinking, into a way of reasoning, and to export what you are learning in the school to analyze what is happening outside the school. So from concept to epistemology to thinking. This is a progressive layer. In Fedora, our colleagues that come from the future studies produced this tool that it is called a Future-Oriented Science Education Manifesto. That is useful for the teachers because it is a sort of I don't know how to say, a catalog of possible activities that can be done in order to introduce this language of the future studies and the language of the futurist. For us, it is very important if it is placed and situated within this much more complex situation in order not to activate only behavior, but also to think the scientific roots and the epistemological roots of this way of acting and way of behaving, of this kind of behavior. And finally, the further layer is to try to use all this different layered knowledge to get agency and to think about possible actions that root into the science, became critical thinking, and became thinking, and then are also become possible to become agent of your future. This is what we call a sort of complexification of the structure that would help students to see that what they learn in physics, in the physics classes, can be important for them, not only as persons, individuals, but also as citizens, part of a bigger community. So this is just the list of the principles that I already introduced you. Concretely, how long is it? Okay. I can finish, so we can talk. Just I would like to show you examples. Okay, we use this structure of design principles. According to these principles, we designed the different modules. Okay, we started to design this. I mean, this was we follow a DBR approach in the sense that it is almost 10 years that we try to start developing and change and to implement them and to analyze the implementation and to see what happens and just to refine them in the class and blah blah blah. So, and we used this structure to design modules for secondary school students on climate change, artificial intelligence, quantum computers, and secondary quantum revolution, simulation of complex systems. So, as you notice, these are STEM, we call them STEM topics. They are not curricular topics in Italy. So, we started from this sort of context because it was for us, because in Bologna, in Italy in general, we have the opportunity to organize afternoon courses for secondary school students where we have much more the freedom to do our modules and to teach, and these are topics that are very important for them. So I am talking about this, but now we are in the moment where we are trying to implement and to enter these topics and this structure at the level of curricular topics. And this is also another story that can be described, because this is a very interesting process, how to come from outside school to inside school, and the kind of institutional change that this kind of approach is producing, and the change in the relationship among the teachers, in the relationship of the school as an institution is creating. This is something that we are doing now, but now I present you some examples of this non-curricular topic. Okay. This is the structure of the module. This is the basic structure that is a way. This is the structure that implements the different principles. The first part of the module, the gray one, is a moment of the module where the students are guided to enter the theme, enter the scientific topic. I'm using now the conceptual, the climate change module in order to illustrate the example, the structure of the module. So, for example, in this case, in the case of climate change, is a moment where the students are introduced to the big theme of climate change, also to think about climate as a complex system and to see the multidimensional climate change, and also to introduce in general sense also what is future thinking. So this is just a very brief introduction overview of the module. And then and then there is the inner part, the green part, that is the much more scientific part. It is the part that is typical lab activities where the students are guided to practice or to encounter some conceptual tool and the content knowledge, and also from an epistemological point of view. For example, in one of the case of the climate change, they try to model what is, for example, what is the process of interaction between radiation and matter, what is the phenomenon of absorption, why the change in the atmospheric composition is producing an increase in the temperature at the surface of the earth, and stuff like that, just lab model. The most important one of the important moments of the module is this part. This is instead where they instead where typically the science of complex systems, the basic idea of complex systems are introduced to the students, and this is the epistemological moment where the linear structure of time and the reductionist, determinist perspective of Newtonian physics is challenged through introducing new concepts like the concept of agents and emergent properties, non-linearity, just moving from a linear causality to a sense of feedback loop, and to introduce the circular causality. And this is also a moment where, in particular, we use agent-based simulation also in order to introduce the concept of what is agent, what is the system, what is this mechanism of emergent properties, of stuff like that. So this is a moment where, from an epistemological point of view, we guide the student to get aware that we are here in front of a change of the perspective to analyze a time evolution in a system. It is there are other possibilities. And this is also a moment, this is very interesting for us, because this is an activity that was particularly successful since the beginning. We used a piece from the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change report for policymakers. We took some part of this and we wrote, it is a simplified version of that. And we invited the students to try to understand and to analyze this report in terms of just in order to stress that also reading is not a linear way of analyzing, just that reading requires to apply some perspective of complexity. And in particular, this was very, for us, we learned this anyway, what we asked them is to analyze take the test, analyze the test, point out the problems that are in the text, and try to build a sort of causal relationship between the problems, just to try to map the problems in terms of possible causal relationship among the problems. And it was very important for us just to invite students and to guide the students to consider only the problems, not the problem, and just to think about the problem and their causal relationship in order to recognize the different layers, different dimensions, different stakeholders, and just to have a picture of the problems. Because the second step of these activities, just as a sort of application of complex system, is to turn what we call the problem tree into an objective tree. Okay, turn the problems into objectives that can be reached. Okay, goals, objectives. Typically, this is just a part of the map. The text is rather complex, and the text is rather also multidimensional, because we took a part of the IPCC map where there is not only the problem of the emissions of the greenhouse gases, but also there are the problems related to the political negotiation, also the sense of vulnerability or stuff like that, and climate migration, the lack of scientific literacy. There is many different layers, because the point was to guide the students to build this problem tree, to turn this into objective tree, and to find the place where they feel much more confident, take agency, or where they felt much more problematic from them, and to take a leverage point to enter that in order to think about their possible agency and activity. So this was a sort of way to develop what we call systemic thinking, and to build this and to move from problems to objectives. In order to problematize, this is another step, to make the students get aware that a map like that is still very linear. Okay, there is still a linear way of organizing the problem, because the other step is to search in the map instead possible feedback loop in the activity that can be positive or negative feedback loop, and just to think about the distinction between the difference between a linear causality where there is one cause and one effect, instead of where there is circular causality, and to introduce this further level of complexification. This is the activities about introduction of complex system and the application of complex system in the analysis of complex text, in order to move toward the last part of the modules that is much more focused on future thinking and action competence, I would say, because here typically these are very creative moments when we invite the students in that to think about that map and to think about possible problems that for them are particularly serious, and just to analyze a situation in order to, for example, and we guide them, for example, to define a problem, to identify a problem that is particularly significant in the present, just to make this map of the problem in terms of causal relationship, and then to try to turn the problems into objectives, and by discovering leverage points, in order to, this is the point, to imagine desirable scenarios. I mean, scenarios where the problems that you have analyzed is solved or is somehow addressed, in order to, and so as soon as you have this possible desirable scenario, then we invite them also to try to backcast and to think about a possible solution. So this is a typical final activities of these modules, where we invite the students to create a presentation of a success story. We invite them to imagine to be in the 2040 or in the future, and to talk in the present, but they are in the future, and to tell the successful story through backcasting and their activities. So this is the structure of the module. So from an introduction, scientific and epistemological reflection, challenging the linear time, and to use these tools in order to learn to read a complex situation and to navigate this complex situation through systemic thinking and creative thinking. Some results. Okay, now we are analyzing a lot of, I mean, we are, when you have a research European project, we are collecting data for many years, and now we are full of data, but this is something that is repeated, something that is rather systematic, a sort of systematic typical results that we have. This is in an interview at the end of this is a student that at the end of this module she wrote, she told, this is an interview, she told, the project has helped us to think, to do something in relation to something else. What I learned about shifting from problems to goals impressed me a lot. It also woke me up, in the sense that often we perhaps see all the problems and do not even see one positive aspect. With this project, we have seen that things are feasible and they depend on how we act. If we are to focus on one thing, we cannot see it in a global context. Instead, we must always have a vision in which both global and transversal, and then, of course, when necessary, we must be able to explore details, but always remember the context in which we are. I find this very interesting, because she understood the sense of the project, because for that, instead the problem of the relationship and to build a big map of the problem, from them it was something that acted at the level of emotional level, because it is a sort of activities that touch the sense of fragmentation of the present. You remember at the beginning the problem of the fragmentation of the event, the sense of you don't have criteria to decide where you are in the world, where are the problems, how the problems are connected. to have the feeling that there is a sort of something that is connected, there is a possibility to build a map in some sense, is something that touch their sense of agency also, because they change their perception of the complexity of the world. So the sense of the relationship, this is typical of systemic thinking, just to have the feeling of a system, the network, a feeling of systemic thinking, that is something that touch also their and another point is that, however, the capacity to move from global to detail. It's not just to have a global map, but to recognize the position of the details in the global stuff. It's the global vision that makes sense to the global details. So this dynamics between the details and the system, in this back and forth dynamics, is something that they got, and this is something that also addressed a sense of frustration. This is also typical of the complex system, to move from the detail to the global level and vice versa. Another point that is important is this tension that is irreducible, but it is something that is important to manage between something that is in the future, but also that you can act in the present. So this dialogue between something that is possible to change in the future, but this dynamic dimension between present and future, not only from details to global, but also from the present to the future. Another aspect that I think it is more that acted at a very important level is to move, is to change the language from the problem to the goal, just to use your analytical abilities to create a map of the problem in order to turn then the problem into possible objectives and possible goals, and just to have the perception that you are not able, of course, to solve the problem, but this is not, but just to think that you can enter the problem, and what you can do, it can be interpreted in terms of part of the system. This is something that we observed in many of these implementations, and we observed this pattern of attitude in terms that at the end of these modules, the students commented that the project and the modules was helped them to widen their perspective, but also it helped them to feel the future approachable at the level of their imagination, thinking. It was also something that could be addressed through concrete actions, and also that they could be agents. So this sense of widening in terms of possibilities, in terms of knowledge, in terms of possible roles of the different stakeholders, and instead of to widen the range of possible action. So it seems like a sort of paradox, but widening the possibilities became something that make the future much more approachable and much more close to their possibility of action. So this the dynamics of widening and approaching became something that we observed many times. And this also was something that for them was very important, because it taught, typically, as I told you, also the students tend to see the future as a sort of funnel. Also, the process of decision making is perceived something that is just cutting opportunity, just cutting possibilities. And this is another source of anxiety. Instead, to think about the future in terms of possibility, and instead of is something also that act at very different level for students' perception of time and student perception of their agency. And another work that we did also, this is a paper that we have published, so you can see the methodological detail that we, and the methodological procedure that we use in order to point out this is however a way to recognize what we call the future scaffolding skills. I mean, kind of skills that have been developed through these modules. We call them future scaffolding skills because they are both systemic thinking, so they build a scaffolding to push the imagination forward, just to create a scaffolding to put your imagination forward and come back. And also analyzing a lot of artifacts, analyzing a lot of students' interviews and questionnaires and stuff like that. Also, it was important for us that educating to the future, it was important to develop these structural skills, systemic skills because they have, it was important to create this capacity to create maps and to organize the present also, in order to, and this can be done in different ways, just distinguishing between what are the some specific disciplinary details and just the much more complex and other details, or for example to see the parts but also the whole and the causal, the system in terms of causal relationship and other different kind of relationship. But also future scaffolding skills indeed are, as soon as you have this scaffold, these maps, thinking in terms of future, it means to in order to keep always open these dynamics between thinking locally and thinking globally, thinking in the present and thinking in the future, also to manage the tension between individual dimension and collective dimension, the dynamic between imagining new possibilities, but also to don't forget concrete action and to combine these different dimensions, and also to balance the need of aspiring and desiring, and that to keeping the feet on the ground in terms of dynamical skills, also in terms of dialectical dialogue among different disciplines and different forms of knowledge, and also to keep this open, the dialogue between things in terms of necessity and in terms of possibilities. So this is these are what we call dynamical thinking skills, because they all refer to tensions between what they appear dilemma or paradox, in order to avoid polarization of thinking, not to think about future without thinking of the present, thinking about creative stuff without thinking about concrete action, just to try to avoid any kind of polarization and to keep the complexity as it is. So this is the combination of structural skills and dynamical skills is also within Fedora. This is the last slide. This is another motto within Fedora when you have to deal with these complex systems, just in order to avoid polarization, just to create an attitude when you have to keep together sense making and just to try a way to make a structure, to develop systemic thinking, but also strange making, challenging the structure, challenging, think out of the possibility, to keep together a sense of comfort, your bubble, but also thinking out of your comfort zone. Just this combination of these different feelings and different emotion is something that is part of science. Also, this is a sort of quotation also of the complementary principle of Niels Bohr, to try to keep together things that appear to be contradictory, but instead they are irreducible tension that we have to manage in order to deal with this complex situation. This is another quote from Daniel. And at the end of the module, he said, talking about the future in an uncertainty present already assumes the value of a promise. And that was for us also very nice, because they started from another vision of the future, where future was not a promise, but a threat. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Olivia, very much for a very nice and inspired talk. I really enjoy. I have listened you before, but this time maybe I have more elements to understand the kind of research you have made with your group. And okay, we start with the questions, comments, and I would like just to say for the people that are following us by YouTube that you can also make questions using the email. I will say in Portuguese, IEA responde, exatamente assim, IEA, né, que seria o código do Instituto de Estudos Avançados, responde @usp.br. Se vocês tiverem perguntas, é só mandar e eu vou ler as perguntas aqui e a Olivia responde. Ok, então let's pass through the questions. I think we have another microphone there. Yes. Who would like to start? Ok. Gil?
Tá, eu sou Gilberto, podem me chamar de Gil. So, Professor, you actually thought about something I was going to ask before the presentation. So, given your extensive work in integrating advanced physics topics into educational contexts, how do you foresee the role of emerging technology like artificial intelligence and quantum computing in shaping the future science education? And also, how should educators and researchers prepare to integrate this technology into curricula to keep pace with the society acceleration?
The question for the million?
Yeah, actually, as you saw, also we have developed a module with the same structure, a module on artificial intelligence and a module on quantum technologies, and exactly with the same structure, and it is very interesting to. I don't know where to start to think, but in particular in the module of artificial intelligence, we use the comparison between the different coding paradigm just to show the kind of revolution that machine learning and deep learning in particular introduced, because the distinction between a classical procedural algorithm or also logical paradigm of and instead the deep learning the deep learning perspective is exactly the same change of perspectives, that is from the determinism, Newtonian concept of time, with a sense of complexity, because also you can model a neural network as a complex system, of course, and there is also this kind of attitude. And also, so we I don't know how to answer about this question, but it can be follow the same the same structure to deal with artificial intelligence and to discuss with the students about the change in the epistemological the epistemological perspective that is induced by the artificial intelligence, and also the complex system in this case is very useful to think about how artificial intelligence is impacting our way of being. It's not, and is challenging this illusion that it is a tool, that is something that you can dominate, and instead this circular dynamics between human, artificial, the sense of creativity is something that if you use the complex system, if you use a different perspective, you can problematize a lot of illusion that you can control, that you can control, and that you can deal artificial intelligence as a tool, okay, as a tool. Instead, it is something that is changing deeply. And for the quantum technology, also there is the same problem and the same. And quantum physics, in particular, is wonderful to think about the change in this temporal structure, because the language and the mathematical model of quantum physics is gold. to think about possible evolution of systems, For the artificial intelligence, this is crazy because this is very interesting because the module was, we started to develop the module with the teachers of the group, and then we also implemented this module in a class, and now this module is becoming something that the school per se is developing without the university, and it became a way to trigger a new dynamics among the teachers because it is very interdisciplinary. So now this is a school in Rimini in particular, that this module on artificial intelligence with this approach is involving teachers from all the disciplines, and this is something that is really impacting also at the level of their curricular studies because these teachers are activating a new way to relate to each other, to discuss to each other, to use this also to think about their pedagogical model, and we are following this institutional, this is what I was talking about, we are following the kind of institutional impact of this kind of module because school is mainly made by the relationship among the teachers. And if you use knowledge to change and to create a new boundary context, boundary zone, to find new way to discuss, this is something that's really changing them. And also arts, the teacher of arts and philosophy, yeah.
Okay, I think half have just take the microphone because the people are not listening on YouTube.
Actually, it's part comment, part question. And the first thing I thought, Olivia, after reading what you'd written actually on this, is that I thought this was a very contemporary article for young people. But then I was thinking about it and I thought, well, young people have always had it. Not young people, but actually everyone has always had this problem over the last couple of centuries, industrialization, world wars, nuclear threats, and so on. This is not a contemporary problem. This is actually quite a historic problem. So that's what struck me particularly as we quoted people like Toffler and Walter Benjamin, who obviously are very much the early, mid and early part of the 20th century. So it struck me as this is not just new. This is about how things ought to have been some time ago. And then I was thinking, well, actually, maybe what you're talking about is much more relevant for adults than for young people, because it's actually adults who are experiencing. I mean, my children grew up in an age where most cell phones, you could communicate across the world straight away. I grew up in an age where we had old-style telephones. Zoom was unimaginable at that time. I mean, I'm the kind of person who's really having problems adjusting to this new world. And so it struck me that a lot of what you've got to say actually has almost more pertinence to adults than it does to young people who can cope with what's happening in a way. And the third point I want to add was I threw in front of you Carlos Ravelli's book on time. On the quantum physicist Carlo Ravelli, I waved his book in front of you, and he says exactly saying the young people, the problem is we've been prisoners of Newtonian science, and he's arguing that Aristotelian physics, which would be much more relevant, much more useful for young people than Newtonian mechanics. But I think he has also a lot of lessons which are completely reflective of what you're saying, looking at time in quantum terms and space-time and seeing how that time is not just a concrete thing. So really resonated. And I was just thinking also of the sociologist Bauman, who talks about liquid society and the sudden movement of talks about financial markets and how money suddenly moved around the world like that, whereas 20, 30 years before this was a slow process, and how we all had to adapt to that. So it does. So I want to make a plea for your work to be relevant to older people as well as younger people. But I think it's doing a fantastic job.
You are right, but indeed the problem is that we are forcing the young people to follow our institutions. They are not for them. So we are creating prisons for them. And we complain where they complain. They are suffering because they are prison. I mean, they are in a so rigid structure that doesn't make it is not adequate for our society, and we are convincing them that the problem is that they are not able to make their plan. So we are inducing a structure and on them that is completely. I mean, it was modeled for another society, and a society that we had. Even if it is an old problem, we grew up in a sense of a progress. We have the experience of what does it mean to prepare ourselves for a better future. We have this feeling. They don't have this feeling. But they are following an educational system that is still built as that. And they feel they are not able to do that. They are not able to recognize this kind of misalignment between our educational system and the society.
This reminds me so much of Hannah Arendt.
Yes,
made a statement that the tyranny of education, that we don't allow the young to grow up in a world of their own making. The older generation impose their own on ours, so completely reflected. Yeah.
And I'm worried because actually also the sense of really Hannah Arendt, but also I mean the sense of the moment of being. I mean, this is something that our generation, the sense of the epiphany, the sense of the perception that in some moment you are aligned in a particular space and time moment where you are aligned with a path, a personal. This is an experience that is more and more rare among these two. This is something that is, for me, is something that, and this is worrying because they're burning out, and the sense of mental disease, I mean, is so large. And also, I don't know, I'm not a sociologist, I don't know, but I feel guilty when I teach physics in that way, because I know that I'm teaching in a way that I'm not preparing them for.
Okay. Someone else, please. Don't be ashamed. Aurea, on the back, please.
Thank you for your presentation, Olivia. I would like to hear you about, you told about the internal, external meanings of times, different times. I was thinking about, and I would like to hear you about the new technologies, not only AI, but the digitalization of the society. Why I am asking you about this? Because the internal time is more and more coordinated by these elements, the wearables in health, and so on, biotechnology to reproduction and so on. So I think one of the suffering of the new generations and us is that because there is no more external and internal thinking about specifically this kind of technologies, and I would like to hear you about this.
Yeah, this is not my field. Probably you are much more expert in this, but I was thinking about the other book of Armut Rose about resonances. Okay, and when he described exactly this sense of this kind of dissonances, okay, that are in this in the relationship with the nature, with the others, and with the self, just because of this the implication of acceleration in terms of hyperconnectivity, and this we are really in this full of information, in this richness of information of our society. So I don't know exactly this, but I mean he is relating a lot of he called this the crisis in the environmental crisis, but also the crisis the crisis in the democracy, but also the psychological crisis in terms of this implication of the digitalization and this hyper connected technologies, hyper connected era. I don't know how to answer about this, because I don't know I just know that discussing with the students about physical system in a lab, and also to think about this internal dynamics of the system, and to open them the possibility that there is an internal. Italo Calvino, an Italian writer, talked about the mental velocity. That is another velocity of it is an internal velocity of thinking, internal way of thinking. Just open them the possibility that there is this is what we can do, okay, and the other, this is other I don't know in other sense, but he stressed this point, the problem of the reduction of the internal time, but also as cause of a lot of psychological difficulties, just because of that. This is what he said. From a physical point of view, you just can problematize.
Cristiano, and after Cristina.
So, Olivia, thank you for your beautiful and complex talk. A lot of things to think about. I was wondering if you have in the project some follow-up about how people after this do the models in their own lives. If they change their way of thinking, they also change the way of being after the models.
In this moment, we are following one person. In particular, we are doing a longitudinal study of one case, because of course this is not easy to. But we are doing now a long study. We are following one person, and because it was particular. I mean, she is a girl. She was particularly able to express, also to be very explicit about the process, and to interact with the other, and also so for us it was important to follow her thinking and their way to re-elaborate and to readapt and to use this thinking for her. So we are using a simple case to start, just to have an idea of what can be possible. Of course, not in a very statistical way, but instead we are following the teachers. This is something we are following. I mean, it's 10 years that we are following the same teachers, and to understand what is the kind of change that this kind of work is producing for them, for the school, for the students. This is
Cristina.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate your talk. I have and I think I had many things in my mind, but one that I think I would like to ask is in the same line of Ralph asked. I would like to know if this kind of theory, or do you think, like he said, more about adult, and I think if it's the same if you compare rich person with the poor person, because sometimes I think for poor person we are constantly in uncertainty moment, and it's difficult to say that just now we are having this. I don't know. It's something that you already think about. Thank you.
Yeah, in this sense, I think that in this sense, I think that our sample, I mean, our context is this is not the main. I mean, luckily in our context there is not this so big, at least so big. Instead, we are following other kind of diversities in the sense also, for example, it is very well known that time perception is gendered. This is something that is different from the not only this is different from girls and the boys. So this is a kind of differences that we are observing, but instead not in our studies, but instead in sociology, this is something that is very, very analyzed, because and they talk also about the terms of colonializing future. Also, the future is colonialized, and also there are. It is very interesting. I mean, there are important studies that study how the capacity to aspire is just a privilege. Just the capacity to, and it is something that there are less privileged community. They don't have either the capacity to think about desirable future. They don't think about it. So this is something that is not in our little specific cases that are just, but this is something that is deeply studied, and it is also a very big topic in the community of foresight. Just to think how the perception of the future is per se a matter of just thinking about the future is something that is a privilege and the way of. But also from this point of view, I think that there is a lot of a richness there, because also the women perspective, I mean the gender's perspective, enlarge the possibility of thinking about the future that is really challenging the one way to think of the future of the model. We are complexifying that way of thinking of the future. So this kind of debate is really enriching the perspective, and it is so not in our specific case. I can just mention some studies.
Juliano?
But okay.
Olivia, thank you so much for your presentation. Like, it's really inspiring, and we have a lot to think about. I'm actually, it's not a question. I would like to know if you know how you are framing the epistemological debate inside this project, because in the same way that traditional physics thinks about concepts of the past, like what we knew, epistemology is like very, in a traditional way, like very similar, and how we knew basically something. So my question is, how do you think about epistemologies for the future? New ways to understand things that are coming to be, for example. I'm not sure if I make myself clear, but what epistemologies are you using to frame this debate about new concepts?
This is I don't know. This is very, but I don't know if it is an answer. But I conceptualize this stuff that indeed if you talk about epistemology, just learning from the past and just to use history, okay, as a critical dimension to think about knowledge and to think about the evolution of knowledge, okay. But if you think about the other side, from the future, instead of looking in terms of what happened, instead of what can happen, on what it could happen and it didn't happen, there is also. And it is also interesting because there is a field, I don't remember, I mean, there is a sort of epistemology about the perception of time, a perception of the future in the past. So also the sense of the future can be analyzed historically in some sense. But I think that the epistemology I'm talking much more about is the epistemology of the possibilities, how to conceptualize the sense of probability, the sense of possibilities, and to move from the epistemology of an idea of science as necessity to a sense of science as possibility. It is already there. I mean, it is in the practice of science. But to conceptualize, for example, the change of the concept of, for example, I don't know if it is the answer, but a wonderful activities that we, just my students organized 2 months ago with the students was a sort of analysis of the different concept of uncertainty in science. So from uncertainty, from the experimental uncertainty to quantum uncertainty, the Heisenberg principle, and uncertainty in the complex systems, and also, okay, just for example, to see how, for example, the IPCC documents elaborated and change their language to talk about possibilities and probability. This is another layer that is not exactly to talk about the future, but is an epistemological part, because we are thinking about the knowledge that we are producing in order to manage uncertainty, for example. So this is, for me, a kind of a way to talk about the future, for example. Also, anyway, there was another layer of within the in climate change field, and in particular in the disaster science, the science of disaster, okay, the science of the extreme events. For example, now there is a new field that is called the storyline approach, that has a completely different epistemology with respect, for example, to the risk-based approach. This is something that can be interesting also for you. I didn't talk about this, because the risk-based approach, okay, is something that is analyze the risk in terms of probability of that something happen or not happen. And so in the terms of the cone, okay, it thinks in terms much more in terms of from the past or present to the future. Okay, the storyline approach that is developed in UK in Reading by Shepard, and they try to analyze instead. They change the perspective. They think about plausible extreme event that can happen. They assume that with the probability of 1, as they were done, okay, and then try to instead to recognize what was happened in terms of a sort of backcasting activities. And they are thinking that in order to present and to discuss the extreme event locally through this different time perspective, has a much more impact at the political level, because it activates another kind of thinking in the people, in the citizen, in the policymaker, because it pushes imagination toward there in the activity, and you can think about different kind of priorities, for example. So also this, what's happening? So this is also another layer to activate a sense of, and Noemi Oreskes, for example, the why we trust science. This is why she made a very interesting analysis of the different epistemological perspectives from the risk-based research, risk-based approach to the storyline approach. So also this is another layer to just.
You allow me to just make a remark. I think in our traditional epistemological perspective approach, normally science has tried to show us what kind of thing doesn't exist in the future. It means that it was a kind of a knowledge that filtered possibilities and say, for example, when you make, for example, a rock that is launched, what do you expect to do? They arrived in this point, and when you say that, you avoid completely other possibilities. Maybe you will have a kind of uncertainty, but the uncertainty is just your misleading possibilities to say exactly what. And I think we have other possibilities in terms of epistemology. You can imagine a kind of knowledge that they are not intent as to say what cannot be done, but sometimes they show you what the possibilities you have for these other things to happen. It may be statistical or just maybe a possible way of thinking using imagination. I think it's about this kind of, I think it's a change in epistemological terms. For that reason, Olivia used changing epistemological roots. It means that it's also a possible use of knowledge because we continue to have the idea of future. And it's important to say that in many other traditions, the idea of future could not be present. For example, in a circular perspective of time, future does not exist because the things are repeat. But in our perspective, future exists. But in this traditional line of epistemology, it's a kind of deterministic line, and you cut completely other possibilities.
Just sorry, one, but I don't know if we are in the same, but it's historically, traditionally, the philosophy of science and epistemology was really built on physics, as it was. It's not by chance that now probably the most interesting philosophical and epistemological reflection are based on other sciences like biology or evolution or stuff like that, because they are fields that they are able to produce new way of evolution, the complexity and the systemic thinking. So probably also that is a field where
let me make a comment. Juliano, I think that the epistemology of the future is a good question, but all our discussion seems that we don't have any intentionality. I'm wondering about the axiology of the future. What values we will value in the future? So we have some intention. So science is not just just open doors for us. We are open this door in some directions with some values. And it's not science. It's not just epistemology giving opportunities to humankind to go in some ways. We are choosing. That's the. It's curious because I didn't saw the word hope. I think that's one of the important words to talk about future. Because this is the direction, this is the values. I think that in the cone, when you see desirable, it's inside of desirable of these questions of what I want to do in the future, what I want the future is, not just what science is capable to give me. So that imposes choices and explicitly say our values, and I don't know, it's just a comment. Oh, sorry.
Bom, eu vou falar em português. E o Maurício e o Cristiano que traduzem, porque vai um pouco na direção do Cristiano. Eu já nem ia comentar muito essa ideia, que é a ideia de futuro. Que a escolha, né, de um referencial bem concreto para isso, mas sem a ideia de história. Quer dizer, o que me deixa um pouco, não vou dizer incomodada, mas deixa um pouco preocupada, é que seja possível falar tanto em futuro sem falar em história. Claro, estão ligadas, mas não são muito diferentes esses dois conceitos, né? Essas duas ideias, essas duas aproximações. E se você quiser também pegar dentro do próprio sistema complexo, do sistema complexo, o que é o futuro? O que é a história? São conceitos e ideias muito diferentes. Então, é um pouco nessa linha que eu que eu queria ouvir um pouquinho, por que não falar em história? Desculpe falar em português.
No, I will not translate. I'm thinking about it. So the problem is the concept of history. No, that's the point. If history is just a set of facts or is open reality.
No, here the futurists really do a lot of history, really analyze the past in a very specific way, just for example, to understand the change and evolution, not focus on the cumulative aspect necessarily or to the fact, but how to analyze the mechanism of change. So history is very important as a source of knowledge in order to understand what are the, and not only, I think that one book that is, I think, very inspiring for us is from the Jürgen Rahn. I told him he is the director of the Max Planck Institute of the History of Science. Okay, and he just recently published a book that is called The Evolution of Knowledge, and it is very interesting because he positioned science as a very special form of knowledge within the evolution of knowledge of the humanity, and also that just to problematize how it was possible to have that particular form of science in some. So also science is and how it can be evolved. So just history is for future is absolutely important. It depends on what you notice in the future, or in the past, in terms of change. There is also the study of the historical studies about the concept of utopia and hope, because also this is an historical concept. I mean, the hope, the kind of wishes, the hope, and the sense of utopia. I mean, utopian studies, they are just to understand how it evolved in the history, this concept of utopian future, okay? And hope, active hope, harmful hope, is now, for example, one of the call, is the last call of this conference on anticipation in the future field of, just because hope is another tricky word, because it can be very nuanced. Some hope can be just something that is an evolution. There is an active hope that is completely different, but also harmful hope that can be. So this is, I didn't mention it, but it is of course a keyword.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Hernani, you will close this session.
Thank you. I'm Hernani. I'm from Federal University of Espírito Santo, because people are watching YouTube. Well, Olivia, my thought, and maybe a question, is on the teaching dimension of the particular idea you presented before in your talk. And thank you for your talk, of course, because I was processing a lot of stuff in my head. But one of that was about the time in that tension between Chronos and Kairos. And I don't know if you have some perspective for teaching on that, but when I think about myself during the pandemic time, my sort of kairological perception is that those 2.5 years, they just didn't exist. And I feel myself in my internal thoughts and feelings and set of events. It was before the lockdown, the heavy lockdown, and then the time, the moment after. Of course, this is not chronological because it was several months between one and another point. But how can we think about future in a kairological perspective when teaching that? Because Of course, I know that this discussion about not only the external time as an external structure upon my agency need to be brought to discussion, because through my internal sense of time, I know, for example, that changes that I want to idealistically contribute in education, they have like a chronological perspective that in a chronological sense can take decades, but maybe it's only one event, one small piece of sand event in my chronological sense. And I was thinking, how can I think about teaching future in the internal time perspective? I don't know if I make myself clear on that.
You mean chirological aspect don't have a directionality?
I'm curious about how to think directionality chronological. I mean, I was wondering how to think the future, the time arrow in a chirological sense. I couldn't think a way of doing that.
Actually, paradoxically, entropy is what entered the arrow of time. And in some sense, it's not the chrono, it's not Newtonian time that enters the arrow of time. So in this sense, the physics, the answer from physics is rather easy. If we want to turn this answer to a personal perception, okay. I'm not sure I got it, but for example, when we I don't know if this is just a connection. I'm not sure about it. With a student of a master student of mine, this is what I'm thinking. We are working about epistemic emotions. Okay, just a sense of feeling the present and feeling the future. Just a sense of what is the feeling of directionality and what is the feeling of the present. Just to stay in the present, but this feeling that something is happening, that is you feel that you are. And this is also this is interesting because before rationality, before becoming. Before the plan, before planning, before doing, you have the feeling that something is happening also in your learning. Okay, just I'm thinking about learning and something like that. So just something that you're not stuck, but this is something that's happening even if you don't have the progression that is measured in terms of performance, in terms of something like that. This is and it's very interesting because. The main source for understanding the epistemological emotions in terms of the feeling of direction is Einstein. Einstein had a wonderful interviews, a wonderful discussion in terms of the description of his creative moment, and just to describe how he had the perception of that something changed, what was the chirological moment that made him the feeling that there was a feeling of direction before finding the solution, before thinking about just this. So this is another very interesting, I think, field of analysis. And also for the students, it's very important to analyze the learning, the moments of learning in terms of emotion, but not emotion, just in terms of epistemic emotion, where there is the creative moment of learning, where you have the feeling that you are in the right direction. And this is also, I'm just thinking about this connection because this is just very old reading. And for example, there was an interesting study in mathematics education that demonstrated that the student, they are we are talking about primary students, primary school students, and they found a sort of correlation between the difficulties in solving exercises in mathematics with the students who had some family problems, in particular because they were not able to think about the future. Because also solving a problem, you have to anticipate the solution in order to address the problem. So this game to put the imagination before and to have the feeling of direction also in the moment of learning, in the moment of solving a problem becomes important, because if you follow the chronological, the linear solution, this is what the school teaches. But if you instead also in the problem, so in the exercises, you think about how to activate this feeling of the anticipation of the solution before searching for the way. This is also another moment of being, where the moment of the eureka moment, where it is a play between the future and the present.
Okay, I like to finish this session. Thank you, Olivia, very much for a very inspired talk, and invite you to have a coffee break.